The courtroom was heavy with tension and whispered amusement. The young black woman in handcuffs stood motionless, her posture straight and her eyes sharp with quiet defiance. Her name was Kesha Williams, 24 years old. Accused of forging academic diplomas to secure high-paying jobs as a translator for multinational corporations. "I speak 9 languages," she said softly. The judge laughed. The laughter spread through the room like cruel thunder. "9 languages?" Judge Harrison Foster repeated, wiping tears of mock amusement from his eyes. "Miss Williams, this is a courtroom, not a talent show." Kesha didn't flinch. She stood with an almost eerie calm, her gaze never leaving the man who held her fate in his hands. 3 days earlier, she had been arrested in front of flashing cameras and curious neighbors, her life reduced to a public spectacle. The media had already decided her story, a poor black woman from the projects pretending to be a genius. At the prosecutor's table, Marcus Thompson smirked as he flipped through the pages of his file. "Your Honor," he began, his voice oozing confidence, "the defendant claims to be fluent in English, Spanish, French, Mandarin, Arabic, German, Russian, Japanese, and Portuguese. Yet she has no college degree and grew up in a housing project. Clearly, we are dealing with fraud." The words stung, not because they were new, but because Kesha had heard them all her life, spoken by teachers, employers, even neighbors. "It's true I don't have a college degree," Kesha replied, her tone even, her eyes burning with an invisible fire. "But that doesn't mean I'm lying about what I can do." The judge's smirk faded. "Miss Williams, I suggest you stop prolonging this embarrassment. You charge thousands for translations you could not possibly provide." "With all due respect, Your Honor," she said, "you're judging me without hearing me out. If you'd allow me, I can demonstrate." "Demonstrate?" The judge burst out laughing again. "What are you going to do? Recite the Chinese alphabet?" From the gallery, a woman stood abruptly, Dr. Elena Rodriguez, Kesha's defense attorney. "Your Honor, my client has the right to defend herself. If she claims these skills, allow her to show them." Foster adjusted his glasses impatiently. "This is absurd. Look at her. A young black woman from the suburbs. How in God's name would she speak 9 languages?" The courtroom froze. The silence was suffocating. Cameras captured every word. The racial slur, the bias, the arrogance, it was all broadcast live. But Kesha didn't react with anger. Her gaze only hardened. Her voice, when it came, was calm as a blade. "Your Honor, you've just proven exactly why I'm here. Not because I lied, but because people like you can't imagine that someone like me could be extraordinary." Judge Foster blinked, suddenly aware of the eyes on him. Journalists, jurors, viewers online. His authority, once absolute, felt fragile, but he quickly masked his discomfort with a stern frown. Before he could speak, Prosecutor Thompson rose again. "Your Honor, this woman caused real damage. 3 multinational companies claim millions in losses due to her translations. Incorrect contracts in Mandarin, rejected documents in Arabic and French, and, most seriously, a failed humanitarian proposal to the UN because of ridiculous Russian errors. Each accusation landed like a punch," the audience murmured. The media's headlines wrote themselves. "Fake translator exposed." Kesha lowered her eyes briefly, not in guilt, but in focus. She knew where these lies came from. She had seen it before. "Miss Williams," the judge said, his voice adopting a falsely kind tone, "this is your chance to confess. Accept a plea bargain and perhaps we can be lenient." That's when she smiled. It wasn't the smile of defeat. It was the smile of someone who knew something others didn't. "Your Honor," she said gently, "may I ask a question?" Thompson frowned. "What kind of question?" "When did Global Tech discover my translation was incorrect? Before or after they found out I didn't have a degree?" The prosecutor hesitated. "That's irrelevant. And diplomatic solutions," she continued. "Did they reject my work before or after they learned I grew up in Mechanicsville?" A ripple of discomfort passed through the jury. Everyone knew Mechanicsville, a poor Atlanta neighborhood synonymous with poverty and crime. Dr. Rodriguez stood. "Objection, Your Honor. My client is addressing potential discrimination." "Overruled," Foster barked. Her background doesn't excuse fraud, but Kesha didn't back down. You mentioned it's statistically unlikely for someone like me to know 9 languages. May I ask how many people like me you actually know? The judge's face reddened. You're testing my patience, Miss Williams. I'm not testing anything, she said quietly. I'm just asking whether this court judge's competence or appearance. At that moment, a whisper broke the silence from the back of the gallery. An elderly Asian woman, her hair tied neatly in a bun, leaned forward. Her name was Mrs. Chun, a retired language teacher. I know that girl, she murmured. Kesha turned her head slightly, their eyes meeting across the crowded room. A flicker of recognition passed between them, a memory long buried. Mrs. Chun began typing something rapidly on her phone. Back at the prosecutor's table, Thompson pressed his advantage. Your Honor, we have experts who've reviewed her work. Their verdict? Incompetence. Experts? Kesha's voice was calm but sharp. Did they check the Beijing dialects? The difference between Moroccan and Egyptian Arabic? Or the tone patterns in academic Russian? A stunned silence followed. Several linguists in the audience exchanged glances. Those weren't things a fraud would know. Those were the words of a professional. Mrs. Chun finished her message and hit send. I found Kesha Williams. It's her. Get everything ready, Judge Foster slammed his gavel. Enough, this circus is over. The trial will be scheduled for... One moment, Your Honor. A new voice echoed through the courtroom. Every head turned toward the entrance. An elegant man in his 60s stood there, tall and dignified, holding a leather briefcase. Dr. James Morrison, retired ambassador to the United Nations, he announced. I believe I have information relevant to this case. The judge frowned. Dr. Morrison, this is a court in session. You can't just... Your Honor, Morrison interrupted politely. I've worked with translators for over 30 years. And I can testify under oath that I personally know the work of Kesha Williams. The courtroom fell silent. Kesha stared at him. Her breath caught. For the first time, the fire in her eyes softened. Relief, recognition, and gratitude blending in one silent look. Thompson jumped up. Objection! This man was not registered as a witness. Dr. Morrison calmly opened his briefcase. Inside are documents from the United Nations, stamped and signed. Miss Williams provided translation for 3 humanitarian missions. Her work wasn't just acceptable, it was exceptional. The prosecutor's face drained of color. The judge shifted uncomfortably. Reporters typed like mad. Kesha closed her eyes briefly, gathering herself. When she opened them again, her voice carried a quiet command. Your Honor, she said, I accept your offer of a demonstration, but not for entertainment. Not to prove myself to people who already decided my worth. I'll demonstrate because justice demands truth. Her gaze swept the room, the judge, the prosecutor, her lawyer, the cameras. And when I do, you'll understand that this isn't just about me. It's about what happens when power fears talent it can't control. The courtroom sat in stunned silence. The session was adjourned for 2 hours, giving time for Dr. Morrison's evidence to be reviewed. But no one in that room could shake the feeling that something seismic had just begun, because Kesha Williams was no longer just a defendant. She was about to become the spark that would expose an empire built on prejudice. 2 hours later, the courtroom felt completely different. The same reporters who had laughed earlier now whispered nervously among themselves. Cameras adjusted. Microphones buzzed. Everyone was waiting for one thing, Kesha Williams' demonstration. Judge Foster returned, his earlier confidence thinned to irritation. He cleared his throat and spoke. Miss Williams, the court has received documents from the United Nations and 2 multinational firms confirming partial employment under your name. However, he added sharply, authenticity is still under review. You may proceed with your performance, he said. Performance, like a poison. Kesha stepped forward. Her lawyer, Dr. Elena Rodriguez, gave her a reassuring nod. Dr. Morrison sat quietly in the front row, his briefcase now sealed and resting on his knees. Kesha's wrists were still marked from the handcuffs. But her voice, when it came, carried power. Your Honor, I'll speak briefly in the languages you believe I forged. The judge leaned back, arms crossed. She began in French, her accent pure and Parisian smooth. Je ne suis pas ici pour impressionner, mais pour être entendu. La vérité n'a pas besoin d'un diplôme pour exister. I am not here to impress, but to be heard. Truth doesn't need a diploma to exist. Then, Mandarin, sharp, tonal, confident. 如果你不了解一个人的故事，就不要评判他的能力. If you don't know someone's story, don't judge their ability. Gasps echoed around the room. The interpreter assigned to verify her translation sat frozen, lips slightly parted. Next came Arabic, soft yet commanding. أنا لست ضحية النظام. أنا نتيجة كفاح ضده. I am not a victim of the system. I am the result of fighting against it. Each word rolled like a wave through the courtroom. The walls themselves seemed to listen. She moved through Spanish, German, Russian, Portuguese, and Japanese, each flowing seamlessly into the next, not like a trick, but like a woman carrying entire worlds within her voice. By the time she returned to English, the silence was deafening. I learned every language the hard way, she said softly. Not in a university. Not in luxury. I learned in kitchens, in bus stops, in borrowed libraries. I translated pain long before I translated words. Even the judge couldn't look her in the eye. But Kesha wasn't finished. You accuse me of fraud because companies lost money, right? Let's look at those contracts. Dr. Rodriguez stepped forward, placing documents on the table. Your Honor, my client reviewed each so-called faulty translation. She found deliberate alterations, words replaced, clauses shifted. Someone tampered with the originals, Thompson immediately objected. Baseless claim. These are official corporate reports. Dr. Morrison stood. Not entirely. I have copies of the originals submitted to the UN. The discrepancies are identical, but only appear after Miss Williams was removed from her position. The room erupted in murmurs. Journalists typed furiously. Kesha turned toward Thompson. You needed a scapegoat, she said quietly. The companies used my background, my skin color, my lack of a degree to cover their internal fraud. And you handed them the perfect target. The prosecutor's confidence faltered. That's a wild conspiracy theory. Then prove it wrong, Kesha interrupted. Let's trace the edits. A young intern from Dr. Morrison's team plugged in a USB drive. Within seconds, the projector displayed a split screen, the original UN translation and the one submitted by Global Tech. Word by word, the differences appeared in red. Key terms altered, entire sentences reversed. The meaning of humanitarian agreements changed, enough to cancel million-dollar deals. Every correction matched Kesha's original version. Judge Foster swallowed hard. His gavel trembled slightly. Who authorized these changes? Dr. Morrison's voice was grim. A senior corporate manager, a man named Robert Hale. He's under federal investigation for laundering funds through false translation contracts. All eyes turned to the prosecutor's table. Thompson's hands clenched. Hale had been one of his primary witnesses. Kesha took a slow breath. You tried to bury me because I was easier to silence than the truth. The crowd was now completely silent. Reporters stared, some already broadcasting live updates. The case against Kesha Williams collapses amid evidence of corporate corruption. The judge adjusted his robe nervously. This court will need time to— No, Your Honor, Rodriguez interrupted firmly. My client has waited long enough. She was humiliated, imprisoned, and called a liar, all because she didn't fit the system's picture of intelligence. The evidence is clear. Dismiss the charges. Foster looked at the mountain of files before him, the stamps, the certificates, the official UN seals. His authority slipped like sand through his fingers. Case dismissed, he said quietly. It was over, but the story didn't end there. 3 months later, the name Kesha Williams was everywhere. News channels, universities, social media. The girl who spoke 9 languages became a symbol of resilience, a living proof that brilliance doesn't need permission to exist. A documentary aired showing clips from her trial. That moment, when she stood, hands trembling but eyes blazing, became iconic. Thousands of young students wrote to her saying, "You made us believe we could too." She didn't celebrate fame. Instead, she founded a small organization called the Truth Project, offering language training and mentorship to kids from underfunded communities. Her motto was simple: if the world won't listen in one language, speak in 9. One rainy afternoon, as she walked out of the community center, a car pulled up. The window rolled down. It was Judge Foster. His face was older, quieter. "I came to apologize," he said softly. "I judged you before I even heard you." Kesha looked at him for a long moment, then smiled faintly. "Justice doesn't need an apology, Your Honor. It just needs memory." He nodded slowly, shame clouding his eyes. "You changed more than your own story, Miss Williams. You changed mine." As he drove away, Kesha stood under the drizzle, letting the rain soak her hair. In the reflection of a puddle, she saw not the girl who had once been handcuffed, but the woman who had turned humiliation into history. Her phone buzzed. A message from Mrs. Chun. Still teaching, still learning. "You made us proud." Kesha smiled and replied, "The lesson isn't over yet." She turned toward the community center where children's laughter echoed. Inside, a dozen students sat around a cracked table, learning their first foreign words. Their eyes gleamed with the same hunger she once carried. "All right," she said, picking up a marker. "Today we learn how to say hope in every language we can." The children repeated after her, their voices merging into a beautiful, chaotic symphony of accents and dreams. Outside, the rain washed the city clean, as if erasing the last traces of doubt that had ever stood against her. And somewhere deep in the heart of Atlanta, the legend of Kesha Williams began, not as a victim, but as a voice that refused to be silenced, because sometimes truth doesn't shout. It simply speaks, in 9 different languages,